Hi Saurabh, welcome to the podcast.
Hey Vala, thanks for having me here.
Yeah, Saurabh is the co-host of a very popular podcast, Pulia Bazi. I actually had the pleasure of interviewing another co-host of Pulia Bazi, Pranay, sometime earlier in my podcast journey, and it was a fantastic episode. I think we covered, semiconductors from start to finish, geopolitics, and all of that. What a fun conversation it was. So super excited to talk to you, Saurabh. I think this episode, for the most part, is going to be about Ati and how it got started. So, um, Ati has been making waves. I think a lot of the more popular YouTube channels like Backstage with Millionaires also covered a lot of the work of Ati. So maybe for people who are not from the space, let's start with a maybe a 1 minute or 2 minute introduction about what Ati is.
Right. We are a simple company as to what we do for customers. We make robots which move material inside factories. Right. So yeah, it's what we make may be a little more challenging, but what we do is very simple to understand for
Hmm.
both users and general audience. We There's a lot of stuff to be moved in factories, as you would obviously know. And we started our journey with a trolley mover, right? So there are a lot of trolleys, especially in discrete manufacturing, which automotive manufacturing would probably be a good example of. And a lot of parts need to be moved from one place to another in trolleys, and that's was a interesting white space that we saw, and we made an autonomous trolley tugging robot. The advantage was that, I mean, there were a lot of robots moving stuff before, famously, like Kiva got acquired by Amazon way back in like 2008, etc. But usually very focused toward warehousing. And I think e-commerce was such a huge driving force that all the innovation kind of happened in that particular area, and people were just trying to keep up with Amazon. That's how it was happening. I think manufacturing was very under serviced and underlooked at. So we looked at manufacturing problems, and we saw that there were good unsolved problems in material movement in factories, which were very different. People were trying to repurpose warehousing robots for manufacturing, right? So they were not really built for them, and that's where the fit wasn't really happening. So I think in Ati we were able to do that.
Yeah, and I think this is quite unique, right? How e-commerce was the first mover in this regard, because usually when you talk about manufacturing or the how processes come into picture, it's usually the automotive industry that takes the lead. You talk about Kaizen or all these processes that we are now following across the industry, so to speak. So,
Hmm.
why do you think that is? Like, I just want to get an insight on why that is the
Yeah.
case.
I think this is not unique, in my opinion, right? As any industry becomes bigger, it becomes a little more resistant to innovation. Um, and uh, and whenever something starts afresh, there's more chances of innovating. You don't have to work against existing processes, existing scale. And e-commerce was just so new, right? I mean, although it started in wherever mid 90s, but it kind of came on its own only in the mid 2000s in the US, and in the emerging markets even later, right? And that's where like the Flipkarts, etc., came about. But I think once Amazon was growing to a certain scale, another interesting thing, and this is even earlier in my startup journey, one of my older bosses had told me that in startups, the fun thing is that you can completely worry about new users and not old users, right? And it's such a liberating thing. If you're an engineer, whenever you have to do something, you have to worry about, okay, if I make this change, what happens to all my millions of users who are already using my product? And you really struggle to get any one new thing out. But in a startup working in a disruptive field, you can completely forget about all your old users and just worry about new. And e-commerce was like that. Although warehousing existed, but warehousing was not as sophisticated. E-commerce has made warehousing so sophisticated, right? And so many new warehouses were coming out. People could design warehouses around robots. Robots didn't really have to fit into the old paradigm, right? So the problem could be reformulated for what was possible, and I think that's true in many fields, and in robotics that became true in e-commerce, right? So there's a very happy convergence of all these things, which is great demand, white space, no legacy, right? And it all kind of comes together. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I think you bring up a very interesting point about startups being, extremely disruptive. I think I heard a few industry leaders talk about the same, and just like Bollywood, where people say that there is not going to be another Shah Rukh Khan or that level of superstardom. I think it applies to big tech or the big firms as well. I don't think big firms will exist anymore. I think that's been the conversation through the leaders, and I think there's going to be startups doing one specific task. And yeah, I don't know, with AI maybe that's getting more and more prominent. Like you will have a monday.com for productivity, and you will have an Atlassian for something else, and they will do that one particular thing really really well. But yeah, I mean, all these big corporations have very deep pockets, so they may continue to diversify. But it's going to be very interesting to see how the next 5 years lies ahead.
But new startups may come up in completely areas which are unimagined today. Like OpenAI could be a potentially very large company, right? So I think, and that's what will happen. Usually, when we try to project the past, I mean, we are trying to find one of the same as the past, but maybe the new Shah Rukh Khan would be a YouTuber, right? So I mean, those kind of things would I think some things will emerge in areas which are completely unanticipated or we can't predict right now. And the way the world economy is growing, even if you capture one hill, you may be of such a huge company. It may be bigger than the General Motors of the past or the IBM of the past, right? Because I mean, who could imagine trillion-dollar companies, right? I mean, like even 10 years ago, and there are trillion-dollar companies today, and I think there'll be more trillion-dollar companies tomorrow because just the size of the economy is growing so huge, and technology gives you so much leverage to capture such huge parts of it.
That is so true. I mean, who knows? The next Shah Rukh Khan may be a Dhruv Rathi or an Elvish Yadav, in a completely different platform. Excellent. I want to know more about how Ati was formed as a company. I know there are multiple co-founders as well. How did you guys come together on this idea?
Right, right. So usually, so I had been an entrepreneur before Ati also. I've kind of been in startups my entire career, and I was mostly in software, although I'm a mechanical engineer. But I was mostly into software, and I had sold my last company to Publicis in 2013. And then I served as the CEO for Razorfish, which was one of their brands. Used to take care of a lot of their global tech delivery, etc. Somewhere around 2014, 15 timeframe, I mean, we were very good at cloud, SaaS, etc. And a very natural thing for probably for me to do was to do like another cloud and SaaS startup. But I, I don't know why I felt that this is there's not too much tech innovation to be done in that space. And I always have self perception that I'm trying to build products which are interesting and which give me satisfaction in terms of cool engineering in it, and are also useful to businesses. And I was clear about me being a little more B2B than B2C. Now, one reason I think I got into software was that software products are very easy to make. They're very quick iteration. And so you can get very quick gratification, right? I mean, a kid with a laptop can make a product, right? I mean, you don't need anything, you don't need anybody's permission. You can make something, and this was very liberating, especially in the late 90s, early 2000 when I was graduating. Um, but I somehow felt around 2014, 15 timeframe when I was thinking about what to do next, that hardware had at least become, and I had seen the old style of software development also. I felt that hardware had come close to the 90s software development. I mean, the first release that I had done, and I got into product management a little too soon, maybe, but yeah. But the first release the big release I had done was more than a year in terms of the full release cycle, right around 15 months or so. And probably around 2015, 16 time frame, you could do a hardware release from scratch in 15 to 18 months, right? So
What were
somehow
some
I
of the
felt,
examples?
I mean, you could take, I mean, that by that time, Raspberry Pi, Arduino were out there, right?
Yeah.
You could actually take them, put together stuff, get a version one out in just a few months, right? So you could definitely do IoT, or you could do all kinds of IoT. I think Ring had become popular by that time already, or was out there. Kickstarter was a big thing. People were doing innovative hardware stuff on Kickstarter around 14, 15 time frame. And by the time I was getting self-driving car revolution had kind of also started. 2016, 2015, 16, people were talking about it a lot. The DARPA challenge had happened 2007, the urban challenge, not the other one. That had made a big news, so it had stayed with me, and I could see, right. I mean, from a DARPA challenge in 2007, 10 years seemed like the right time for things to be like commercial ready, right? So I said, this sounds good. This is what I want to do. I'd never done it, so I did like a lot of prep. 2015, 16 itself, I started doing a couple of angel investments in hardware companies. That was one way I thought I could learn. So that's something that I did. And then I felt, okay, I'm getting a hang of this thing, and I would probably want to do a company in this space. Uh, I didn't really know what to do. And then coincidentally, I had met my co-founders in a very different context. Actually, I was in parallel toying with this idea of doing like a school for gifted children, right? And Vinay used to do something for gifted children separately. He used to be a professor at ISC, had done Simputer famously long, long time ago, which was like a cheap handheld computer. Um, and I'd met him in context of the education, actually, right? And he had a very bright, talented kid who he was mentoring, Saad. And we were just, I mean, we were meeting in context of the school primarily, and we were discussing, and we were solving a couple of interesting engineering problems for fun. Okay, I had a interesting, I'm never short of ideas usually, and I had an interesting thing. I wanted to make like the anti-microwave. Okay, so microwave typically, like, you put something in it, and a minute later you have like popcorn, right, or something. You have cold food and it comes out hot. And I was like, is there something I can put like hot stuff and it comes out cold after a minute? Okay. And by the way, it's always a very hard problem to cool down anything. Okay, heating is easy. It happens naturally, this entropy. But cooling something is very, very hard problem. But it was a fun problem, and we were working on actually that problem. Okay, just for fun and for kicks. But then I was getting fascinated by this, and I said, let's maybe make something. I figured maybe we could work together as a team. It was a very odd team, right? I mean, Vinay was like an ex-professor. He was pretty senior. Saad was like a teenage kid. I was kind of in the middle. I was in my late 30s. And I said, okay, I mean, maybe while doing this problem, I said, yeah, maybe we can problem solve together. Let's see if we want to make it formal. And I had money. I said, let me just put my own money on the table. I always felt that Indian startups were very anemic in terms of the seed funding they had, and hardware requires even more money than software. So I was very conscious of that, and I said, okay, I will put some serious money behind it. I put like $1 million as seed capital just to start, right? I said, let's do this, and I didn't ask anybody for money. I like, let's make something. Let's be sure that we can actually do something before we go and talk to other people. And we I would say within a few months, I figured that if we have to do only B2B. All, I mean, whether the Musks of the world, even at that time, were claiming in 6 months we will have self-driving and all that. And once we started doing it, I said, not happening for 5, 6 years. Okay, I have probably underestimated at that time, so it's still not happened. But I think now we are seeing some early signs, right? But at that time, I said, no, this is not happening. We saw what could be done, what possible, and as I very quickly gravitate to my comfort zone, which was B2B. Right, I understood B2B, that I can do business. I understand how to sell to businesses, how to make products for businesses, and I thought the technology is good enough where you can constrain the problem, so that you can make it valuable, right? So we came from that perspective, making a self-driving vehicle, and then we added some constraints like, and I was always worried about regulation, and this was, I mean, because I do Pulyabazi, and I was associated with a think tank, so regulation was on my mind from that perspective, and was a little odd thing. Usually, you think of regulation after you make the product. And here I was, because I was working with a think tank, and I was like, was regulation can kill us, and what all in regulation can kill a startup, and that was part of my initial criteria for the product design. So I said, okay, we will not move people, okay, we will not go on public roads, okay, and couple of other things, right? So but these two things definitely came from a regulatory hat, and then that kind of became like I said, yeah, a material mover in industrial or campus like environments. We were still not very narrowed down, and we just made like and I said, let's make it a small one, because I mean, having done enough product development, I said the first one we make will be useless, so we should be prepared to make multiple iterations. Let's not spend all our money making one vehicle, then we're not going to get anywhere, right? So that's kind of, I said, let's put only 20% towards the prototype. So we said, okay, what can we make in 200K, because rest of the money we'll need to make the rest of the 5 iterations. And we made like a first iteration. So it was like a small 200 to 500 kg material mover, and we got ISC to give us testing area. We tested it in the ISC campus in Bangalore, and yeah, it was good. It came out. We were able to shoot a video. That was probably one of the first self-driving vehicle working in India at that time. And we said, yeah, once it started working, we said, okay, let's make better versions of it. As soon as we had a version which we could take outside a test environment, somehow the first place we got, and it looked coincidental, but in hindsight it was not, was a factory. Okay. So Naveen, who's in a way our current CTO, one of his friends was running a factory, and he said, "Why don't you come and show it to us in our factory?" It's an aerospace factory, and we went and did like a demo there. And I was like, "Okay, this sounds so cool. This looks like a real need." And I saw that the factories, we were really trying to figure out how to put things on the robot, not put and move things. And the factories were just full of trolleys, right? And I said, well, maybe there's something to it. And after that, I visited a couple of more factories, and I said, no, I mean, we should really target moving the trolley, and rather than moving stuff on the trolley, right? And that was I think a good decision we took at that time. And that created the product market fit, because I was a big believer always in low friction. So where you want to be, customers should not have to change much to adopt you, right? And that was like a guiding principle. And with the trolley, it was very little they had to change. And we were already coming from the self-driving car mindset, where we expected no change in the environment and infrastructure, not a single sticker, right? So it was with 3D LiDAR and stuff. So we were I think, the first, if not one of the first 3D LiDAR based industrial B2B product, which was autonomous, right? Because we just came, and for us, it was ordinary, right? I mean, every self driving car was kind of, I mean, except Tesla, right? Where Elon did not like it, but everyone else was 3D LiDAR, and it was very natural for us. But in our world now that I see it, right, which is now industrial robotics, nobody, even today, it's very, very uncommon. We are one of the first guys who did it. We are still one of the first guys to have a significant fleet out there with 3D LiDARs. So there are a lot of these interesting things that we did, which, yeah, finally we became a product.
Yeah, what you said about self-driving cars is so true, because I was interviewing Rafi Krikorian, who headed the Uber self-driving car organization, and he said that everyone overestimated that self-driving car is going to be 5 years down the line, 7 years down the line. But once they started to work on it, and one of the reasons why Uber stopped it was because of the insane amount of edge cases, right? I mean, then they realized that it is almost impossible to do it. I mean, I know that with the latest version of full self-driving on Tesla, it is almost there. But yeah, it is the edge cases, and they realize that they have to solve human intelligence to solve self-driving. So Rafi actually mentioned that self-driving can work extremely well in controlled environments, like you mentioned. If it's an Austin to Houston corridor, just highway, just freeway driving, it's going to be great. Industrial environments, regulated environments, fantastic. So looks like you figured out the niche pretty early, and I think you have a knack for going for like a low hanging fruit, in the sense that, low friction, low hanging fruit kind of problem. What I wanted to know was, to build a team, you had a background in tech, but you were more on the software side, product management. I am not sure about the background of the co-founders right now, but how did you develop or hire people to manage the tech side of things for the first ever product?
Right. So actually, nobody knew anything, and I said, "It's okay. I'm putting in the money. Don't worry about it. Let's all learn together." Okay. Nobody in the team had any clue on how to make a self-driving vehicle. Okay. Like no clue at all. And I said, it's okay. And I like that actually about startups. You can so I always give this story, right, to people. There's this old two monks and a bear story, right? A bear is chasing two monks, and one of the monk then tells the other monk that, well, uh, guess what? No use running, right? The bear is going to catch us. He says, I'm not trying to outrun the bear. I'm trying to outrun you. so, so it's a little morbid but very illustrative story that mostly we are all trying to outrun the bear, and in startups case, the bear is the market, right? And all you're trying to outrun is the next startup, right? Now, when you go into a very new field, everybody is as dumb as you, okay, roughly speaking, right? I mean, there are like the new iPhone comes and you would see ads, right? We want a 10-year experienced developer in iPhone. I mean, what does that mean, right? It's so new, right? Mobile is new. So similarly, self-driving car, I mean, there were people with 10 years experience because there were the teams which started in the DARPA open challenge, etc.,
But in
right?
India
But
at the time?
there were a few people who came to India also. Not in India. In India, probably nobody. But we were. I would always compare with what's we are competing with the world, right?
Yeah.
We are not. Although we are a company starting in India, but I said, I mean, yeah, if you're working on cutting edge stuff, you should not limit yourself to one market, right? So that's not how we were thinking about it. But what I found interesting, the couple of things I found interesting. All the talent was sucked into the public autonomy problem. It's good. Okay. Very little problem, very little talent attacking this problem. Okay. So there's a vacuum of talent. And so you could very quickly become close to what is good in the and close to what is the state of the art in this space. So, I mean, everybody, I mean, we hired like around 25, 30 people. So it was the largest team for a startup, but we were doing full ground up, right? So we created a mechanical engineering team, an electronics team. We made our own motherboard, our power supplies, right? Our own software stack, right? So across all these things, we were kind of, created this team where no one had experience doing this. But we just learned together, read a lot of papers at that time, right? Yeah. So everybody had that mindset of doing applied research, so to speak, and we were a very applied researchy lab kind of an environment for a long time. Right, and that's how we operated, and that was one of the things. So later on, the earlier two technical co-founders actually moved on after we got funded, because we were. I think a good reason was that we were no longer that applied lab kind of an environment, right? I think we were very good fit in that environment, but once it became a real product, and you had to actually worry about, okay, if I make a change, what do you have to do with the older guys? And yeah, I mean, all those real problems do catch up with you. You have to solve them.
Yeah. Ati became bigger, and everything that comes with a bigger company came to your space as well.
I mean, we are still a very early startup, but in a startup also, I mean, within that also there is the big early and a later stage, right? I mean, yeah, we have now like I mean dozens of factories where our robots are running 24/7, etc. Right? So it's a very different environment compared to having one vehicle which you are worried about how it'll whether the wire will come loose.
Yeah. So one of the things that I noted with Ati's products or Ati's robots is that the ground clearance. So I have been following AMRs, which are autonomous moving robots, and autonomous guided vehicles, right? So these are typically the two kinds of vehicles that are employed in factories. So the ground clearance of usual AMRs is very low, and they are
Mm,
almost sticking to the ground when they move. But
mm.
Ati's robots are different. Any reason why that is the case?
Yeah, because as I mentioned, right, in fact, we never used the word robot probably for the first 5 years in the company. We always thought we were a self-driving car vehicle company. We just happened to run in a factory, right? And that's why even today, right, we do interplant movement. We'll go out of the factory on the road and get into the next plant next door, right? And for us, it's like one of the things we've been doing from day one. It's not like a new feature we've added, but it's a big deal. I mean, nobody does it, right? So it's just, I think, from the perspective that we came in to the problem, and also I think an advantage of being a newbie in the field, right? So that's also an advantage. Sometimes I feel, I think people who are coming from the robotics experience and industrial automation, and who said we will make better AMRs. Um, AMR itself was a big deal from 2014-15 onwards only, right? I mean, ROS came out around 12, 14, and then AMRs came out, Fetch or ClearPath and Vecna, I mean, all these are early companies, MIR, right? And I think everybody just went into the factories or warehouses, saw the old AGVs, and said, okay, can I improve the software here? Okay, so the thought process was very incremental, and I think for I was quite surprised, although I had more software experience. Somehow, a lot of robotists seem to be more softwarey than hardware. Okay, so they were more comfortable doing software innovations and taking existing hardware rather than just thinking ground up. Okay, that's a surprising thing to me. I mean, I somehow, maybe because I was a mechanical engineer, I'd never done it, but there was maybe the self-image created the comfort. And very interesting trivia. My final year BTech project was material movement in job shops and scheduling that. Okay, so somehow I had some kind of familiarity with the problem for sure. I had studied that problem when I was in. I knew that the problem is actually interesting. uh, we didn't know the solution, and we didn't know that maybe now there is a good solution. But finally, I mean, it's very strange that, yeah, I'm doing something that is very rare that somebody can say, yeah, their BTech project is their company. but yeah, for me, it's happened like that, coincidentally. But yeah, so coming back to the ground clearance, right? So we were running outdoors in ISC, broken roads in India. You had to have good ground clearance. I mean, otherwise you can't run the robot. Right? So we always had decent ground clearance because we were actually an outdoor but closed private environment robot or a vehicle from day one.
Mm. That makes me wonder why all the other companies are having such low ground clearance. I
It's just
can't think of a
legacy.
reason. Mm.
It's just legacy. People, when you borrow older platforms, you don't know how many assumptions you're borrowing from them. Okay, and you borrow them, I mean, yeah, without any conscious decision, but you borrowed them because you have not reevaluated their decisions. You took it because, yeah, this is working, why do I have to reinvent the wheel? But the thing is, as soon as autonomy is reasonably fundamental enough technological change, that you should reinvent stuff, in my opinion. Right? Like a lot of people are now saying, right? Like, I mean, the car can be reinvented around the autonomy, but it's a very hard problem, so people are not doing it. People are still trying to make existing cars autonomous. But you could probably do a ground up car which is autonomous, which may be pretty different.
That is so true. I think the lidar technology developed around the car design, right?
Hmm,
And
that's
I
right.
think, yeah, maybe the lidar could have designed in some other way if the cars were designed fundamentally differently. So,
So that's an interesting point you bring up, and because we use 3D lidar, you would see that our vehicles also look very different, and we had to create this sloping design on the top to borrow the assumption of the car, because the lidar was designed around the assumption of the car. Now I had to bring back that assumption into my robot. Okay, and we had to recreate that sloping design around the robot so that the lidar could have the right kind of field of view. So because the lidar was developed according to the field of view the car already gave. Now I'm using the same sensor, and I had to now recreate the field of view of the car in the robot.
that is very interesting indeed.
Yeah.
Uh, One of the things that came to my mind is that, I understand that the autonomous robots work in relatively controlled environments like factories. But when I come to think of it, factories have workers moving around. They have to work in collaboration or in conjunction with humans, and there could be other edge cases like spills and contamination and all of that. So when I come to think of it, aren't the edge cases just as bad as driving on the road? Like, how did uh, designing a robot to work within a confined environment eliminate all the edge cases that, or not all the edge cases, but relatively less edge cases than that of the roads?
I used to give this very simple example to people. Like when we initially were had a robot and we were not totally committed to factories, maybe, right? Because we were still open and we were like, okay, we could do this, we could do that. A lot of people used to come to us because we were like very early in India, especially, right? Saying, can you do this for me? Can you do that for me? And then I came up with an interesting rubric. I said, can I kill a kitty in this environment? Okay. If so, I don't think we are kitten proof. Let's put it that way, right? A kitten can come and play around with the robot and definitely get killed, right? So if an environment can legally have kitten in it, factories can't. Okay, warehouses can't. But many other environments can, and I don't think any self-driving car would also be comfortable killing a kitten, right? And that's a very hard problem, by the way, right? I mean, people are asking me why don't you run it in malls, and I said malls can have a kitten, so I can't do malls, right? You can do, and you can solve that problem by the way in some other ways, right? You can like push the kitten instead of going over it, but that now that goes against your higher ground clearance. Right? So if you see robots which work in malls or service robots, they have practically no ground clearance because you want to not want to go over almost anything, right? Because then you can go over something living, right? And that's going to be bad. So you can constrain stuff. It's not as if you can't. Speed makes a big difference, right? Because you're so low speed inside a factory that it eliminates a huge number of edge cases. Also, the fact that you are with badged employ people, right? So, I mean, there are a lot of closed spaces. Like I said, mall is a closed space. An amusement park is a closed, but these are not safe spaces, in my opinion, for the kind of robot we are developing. There, you have to develop a different kind of robot, and I think that can be done. But we developed a kind of robot which it does very well in a factory, and we want to then stick to it. So, and usually, I feel good product design will make you lose out on opportunities. If you're only making decisions which don't make you give up on a use case, then it's not really a decision, right? I mean, you can also do it. A decision usually is like a hard choice between two things. So we made a lot of hard choices, which made us very good in factories and not so good in other areas. And so spills, etc. By the way, we are rain proof also, right? And not, because we could go outdoors, right? And in India, we had to handle the rain. So we handle the rain. We've handled two monsoons already as in production as a vehicle. Now, if I can handle the monsoon, I mean, if a pipe bursts inside a factory, I mean, yeah, no big deal. We can't handle flood, but yeah, rest of stuff, yeah, good.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier in the podcast is that Ati wants to compete with the best of the best in the world.
Mhm.
But when it comes to getting the first customers or to think about who your customers would be, because when you're working on a startup, yes, you're solving a very hard problem, you're looking at a gap, but you must have thought about who my first customers would be or who I want to serve. Did you at the time think about, are my customers going to be in India or abroad? Because both of them will have different set of challenges, right? Uh, and from what I know, or from what I have been hearing, manufacturing in India has not caught up to the levels that it should, and it's definitely getting there with multiple changes in laws, and with semiconductor manufacturing coming to India, and also a lot of automobile companies setting up their factories. But like compared to a country like China, for instance, manufacturing was not as big, especially when you started it. So how did you look at getting the first customers?
So It's a very good question actually, and I thought very deeply about it when I started itself. So as a product manager, I was mortally scared of designing a product where I'm not close to the customer, right? And you want to do like a you want to do a product for a global market. What does it mean? There's no global market, right? So you think US maybe, right? Okay, I want to do it for say the US market. I'm sitting in India, right? Our team is in India. I mean, you will make mistakes. I mean, it's not about. I mean, yeah, you're just not close to them. You'll make the wrong product. So I said, what do I do? This problem I understood. I said, initially itself, that's one of the criteria when I was choosing the product itself, was that I want to do something where even if I do it in India, this what I do actually scales globally. Okay, now that's not an easy challenge to give yourself, and but there it turns out that there is a subset of problems where the thing looks the same whether it's in India or in the US. And I'll give you multiple, like think of a McDonald's. It's reasonably the same whether you are in India or you are in the US, or especially if you are on the other side of the counter of McDonald's. Okay, so you can subdivide the problem, right? The other side of the counter of McDonald's looks very similar wherever in the world you might be. Okay, similarly, you get into an IT office in Bangalore, and you can't. If I were to close your eyes and then ask you, you can't tell whether you are in Seattle or you are in San Francisco or you're in Bangalore. Absolutely not, right? You're on a golf course, you can't make out if you just wake up. I mean, you may know what the course is, but the environment. So there's lots of factories turn out to be that kind of a problem, by the way. Okay. And that was very encouraging for me when we did factories. And I said, yes, a Bosch factory in Bangalore or Germany or US or China looks exactly the same.
That is a very interesting point, and the reason why I want to double down on this is, so factories are country regulation proof. Is that a fair assumption to make? Because all the standards, all the regulatory signs, all the hazard signs, all of that is standardized, and which is probably why they all look the same, or they are all,
Yeah.
at least of the same standard as any other
Yeah.
country.
Yeah. So by the way, these kind of things are controlled by the company and not by the country. That's why they're the same. So a Bosch factory and a Toyota factory can look very different, right? But the overall factories also have converged. It's not as if they are very different, right? Because they have converged into what kind of things make a good factory.
Yeah,
There
the
is
lines, the
consensus
color
in the
coding, all
industry.
of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and we don't worry so much about color coding and lines. I mean, we try to be like a self-driving car-ish kind of a mindset, and we want to
No, I'm just
and
talking
those were
about the
things.
standardization, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Lots of standardization, and within that, there are things which are not so good also compliant. And by the way, you will be surprised. The best factories in India have more compliance to these best standards than the US. I've seen US factories with very poor 5S discipline, very poor, yeah, I mean, very poor flooring also. Okay, even in the US. And the best factories in India also is very diverse, right? So one thing when we started out itself, I believed, right? I mean, if you're doing something cutting edge, best in the world, then you want to work for best customers in the world. And that's a conscious choice, I believe. I mean, one could think, right, that I'll do something for like the neighborhood Balaji fabricator. It's an easy place to go in, etc. But you have to consciously say, no, I will go and work with only the Bosch and the Samsung and the Hyundais or the TVS of the world, right? Because why not, right? I mean, they also have this problem. I'm making something which is best in class in the world. Why shouldn't I serve the best customers out there? And that scales much better. The lower end of the spectrum doesn't is not is very different. Okay, they will have their own challenges, but we stuck to that, and our first customers, and that was a little audacious thing to do. Everybody told us, right? I mean, these big guys don't work with startups mostly. Okay, you will do an innovation project with them, they'll not give you real. But I think that was something that we were able to overcome, where we I think we just solved a very hard problem. And I think once you solve very hard problem, some of the other hard problems also become easier. Okay. So many of the factories we went to, they were all looking for something like what we were doing and not finding it. And now you're the only guys doing what they want. All the other criteria will get watered down. Okay. And we were very, I think, lucky to be in Bangalore. I didn't know at the time I started that Bangalore has such rich manufacturing setups. I didn't know that at all. I was a little ashamed after some time. I was like, why didn't I know this, right? I was
Yeah,
living
I
in
think
Bangalore for like
Bangalore
15
before
years.
becoming yeah, I think Bangalore before becoming an IT hub was a manufacturing hub. With
Yeah,
the
yeah. Bosch has been
HALs
in
and then
Bangalore since 70s.
yeah.
Okay, late 70s. So like really top notch companies were in Bangalore, and even automotive, and some of it we don't consider Bangalore. There is a suburb in Tamil Nadu called Hosur, right? But
Ashok
it's
Leyland.
really a suburb of Bangalore. It's in Tamil Nadu, and this huge amount of manufacturing, but all this management lives in Bangalore,
Yeah.
travels every day to the factories in Hosur, and you have TVS, Ashok Leyland, now Ather, Ola, right? I mean, all these guys, and Toyota was in Bangalore for forever, right? The Honda two-wheeler factory was in Bangalore forever. Volvo buses were made in Bangalore forever. So I'm just telling you the OEMs. Now just think how many tier ones and tier twos and tier threes are there around them just in this whole Bangalore cluster, right? So it's huge, and I actually didn't know, to be honest, and we just got lucky that we were doing this startup in the right city.
Oh wow, that is quite transformational. I mean, getting the first customers is tough by itself, and
Mm,
solving a problem that they were looking at
mm,
and have them seeing the gap and overcoming it
mm,
is incredible. Um, Great. So now we are at a time when industry is getting revolutionized. There is Industry 4.0 and all these crazy buzzwords that are floating around. Do you see a fundamental change in the way factories operate today versus how they will operate in the future? And the reason why I'm saying this is, I have been seeing certain videos of this EV startup in the UK called Arrival, which
mm.
has
Yes.
modules instead of conveyor
Mm,
lines.
mm,
And there is Tesla, which is completely going the other way with gigafactories, and Elon Musk saying that that was autonomous or making it completely autonomous was not a great idea. And then there is the other end of the spectrum, Arrival, even Hyundai, they set up a really small factory with a really small footprint in Singapore,
mm.
where they don't have an assembly line, so they have these cells where something happens, and then some assembly happens in one cell, and it can go to forward, it can also go back, and all of that. So being in this space and observing this industry closely, do you see a fundamental shift in factories happening?
I fundamentally believe in that actually. I think it is going to happen. It's going to take some time. I think Arrival was a little ahead of its time. I think they had very good ideas, and probably I spoke to the Arrival robotics team also, by the way, some time ago. So I had some good insights on what they were doing. As far as I know, they're not doing as well for what I would have expected,
I think
but
they are
they're
targeting a
yeah.
niche market. So
Mm.
I think there are similar companies here in the US as well, like
Is
Canoe.
it?
There is Zoox.
Hmm. Okay.
Talking about just multi. I don't know what to call them even, like they are public transport companies, but more like point to point transport. Like you have an
Sure.
autonomous vehicle
Sure.
come pick you up, etc. So it's a very niche market. I don't know how it will scale, but the buses look good.
Yeah,
So
yeah, they do. And but I do think that the fundamental idea that I look at, for example, conveyors are like circuit switch networks of the old time, if you have to do a telecom analogy. And the modern AMRs, the kind of stuff that we do, transform that circuit into packet switching. Okay, so you discretize all the stuff and you can move things in a discrete fashion. You have more flexibility as to what goes where. You can realign stuff much more quickly. And I think Tesla had a very bad experience with a lot of these old generation German AMRs, and they didn't really work to the level they expected for good reason. They don't work, right? I mean, so obviously they got flustered with that. Even today, I would say though, the scale that Tesla is trying to do, they are doing the right thing, right? I mean, a conveyor is still the best way to move things from point A to point B in large volume. That's the most reliable, cheapest, and high throughput way is to just put a conveyor between 2 points. But what it comes it as is at the cost of flexibility. right? So as soon as you see flexibility being more important than only throughput, right? And for Tesla, that's not so true, right? I mean, they have like 4 SKUs, right? But as we are becoming a more complex economy generally, I think every product that you see, typically the number of SKUs in the product is increasing greatly. You have things in multiple colors, multiple shapes, sizes. Personalization is the keyword, right? And in some way, e-commerce is in a way driving manufacturing. You want same day delivery in small batches. Okay, and what that means is that you eventually want to, I mean, people are trying to do stocking, etc., but if you take the lean and just in time principle all the way around, you would ideally like a small factory next to a warehouse which can produce things in small batches, which is exactly, probably ideally you should start making things after the order, after the checkout of the cart. Okay, but it should get made within whatever, half an hour, few hours. It should go into the warehouse close by and be in your hands end of the day,
Yeah.
right? And that's, I think the future would be that, I don't know when, but the future would be where manufacturing to in your hands is is the same day. People were thinking 3D printing will do it right in your home, but I think that's complex. Most products are a result of a little complex supply chain, etc. But I think the core force driving it is the same. A product which can be delivered that way, they will, I mean, people will 3D print it very close. It's 3D printing is like a modern manufacturing in a box, right? Low volume, and fully flexible, right? So these are, I think, all, if you see, there is this underlying idea which is all very similar. Okay, and we are definitely making, for example, a new version of the robot which is very which is absolutely designed for assembly itself, right? Where you could do modern assembly lines which are so different. Assembly lines are only straight, right? But now if they are on robots, you could make a matrix out of them, right? You could make a line with like a with probably like a loop coming out of it for different products, where there is a variant and you go into the loop, join back the main line. You can do very interesting things. As soon as you have robotic assembly lines, you could have conveyors also have the same speed at every point. Whereas with the robotic assembly line, you could make sure that if some of the cells are bigger versus smaller, you can run in various variable speeds across assembly lines. And so there are a lot of interesting things which get unlocked. You do compromise on throughput a little bit, but you get so much flexibility in all other dimensions. So when we were studying like flexible manufacturing systems, like when I was in college, but I think they're now becoming real. Okay, they're now becoming real.
Yeah, and I think if you don't have a conveyor and if you don't have a set path, I think that can also make these assembly stations a lot more fungible. Meaning
Hmm?
they could be screwing today,
Hmm?
tomorrow it could be a pick and place station and so on. So that is an interesting. But what kind of industries will adopt something like a microfactory that you mentioned,
Hmm.
closer to the warehouse? That will be something that would be interesting to see in the future.
Yeah. I think EV is a very good segment in my opinion. I think people only think a car company, and I think Indian entrepreneurs should do more in this space. I feel it's a very ripe space to do something for many people. And people always think, right? I mean, you have to be like a very large company, like a TVS, or say, yes, Royal Enfield will be an example of a small company, right? Making the bullet bikes, etc. But otherwise, you have to be a Hero, Bajaj, TVS. But why? Right, with a micro factory kind of a concept, and the kind of things that an how EV is so much simpler to make, you could be selling maybe 10,000 vehicles and be a viable company, right? So could you have 100 EV companies whose total volume itself is not too high, but they are all viable companies making hundreds of crores, right?
And it's also easier
And
to roll back or maybe change
yeah,
your plans,
yeah,
right?
change your product mix, right? I mean, and there's so many things you could do. You could make agri stuff, you could make industrial EV equipment. Not everything has to be a consumer kind of a thing. Or even if you're in consumer, you can stick to like high performance sport bikes, all kinds of very, I mean, uh, I would say lower volume, higher margin. Automotive is tends to think only high volume, low margin, right? You can be a little bit lower volume, a little higher margin kind of a company, in with this kind of a mindset. I wish more people were thinking about it like this. But usually what happens is people are always thinking in silos, right? So people are thinking about the product. As I said, right, sometimes robotics guys are afraid of hardware. Most guys, even the EV guys, are afraid of manufacturing. Okay. So many other people will think about it and then outsource the manufacturing to someone else and say, okay, can you contract manufacture it for us? In Ati, we do our own manufacturing, by the way. Right? So we've gone all the way. We don't even outsource that. We just do it full end to end.
Yeah, with EVs, I don't know how good an idea that is because we all saw what happened with Fisker
Oh, yeah.
when they
Yeah.
contract
Yeah.
manufactured it. Yeah, that's a very
Yeah.
challenging problem to solve. You mentioned about supply chain in a different context, but how difficult? Like, did you face any problem with supply chain when you were getting started at Ati? Did you get enough suppliers in India?
I mean, when we started out, I mean, we were not very focused. I mean, do we have to get it in India or not? Who cares, right? You're a global company. You can have a global supply chain, right? So it didn't really matter. But being in Bangalore did help. I mean, you can get all kinds of suppliers. So India has. I mean, I didn't mention it when you were saying earlier, right? That the Indian manufacturing is a little lacking, maybe compared to China, but Indian automotive industry is absolutely world class since the 90s. Okay, it's not a recent phenomena. All right, so it's very very good, and aerospace too, by the way. Especially Bangalore has a very good aerospace manufacturing cluster, also, right? Just because of ISRO, etc. But enough exports, by the way, and enough exports in automotive also. So it's not huge, but it's been okay. It's around 15% of our GDP, and the GDP has been going pretty well, but manufacturing has kept up. Right, it's not as if it has dropped to 10% because the rest of the, I mean, okay, the overall economy is growing. The manufacturing has kept pace. It has not increased, but it has kept pace. So it's not been so bad. So yeah, you could get enough suppliers. You can make practically anything in India, but the volume is not there in India. So India is not a big market, right, for many of the things. So motors, especially when we started out, motors, etc., were important things you couldn't get done. But electronics you could get done. People were thinking you couldn't get done electronics. We do our motherboard in India, right? So that's all those are easy. PCBs, etc., can be done very easily in India, right? But motors, controllers, yeah, those were issues. Batteries, BMSs. But over time, we did find and develop Indian suppliers for everything. So our motors come from India. The supplier made it specifically for us. We were the first hub motor, by the way, robot also. We got, and we get it done in Coimbatore. So yeah. So that was something unique. The controller comes from another Indian company, and we were able to leverage some of the EV ecosystem in India, and that helped us. So you could get very reliable parts, which were very cost effective, because you were leveraging the EV supply chain and not the traditional robotic supply chain. Okay,
That is excellent.
so we
Yeah.
did that. Yeah.
Well, Saurabh, before we end this podcast, let's maybe take a sneak peek into the products that Ati manufactures as of today and the plans for the future.
I'm sure. So, I mean, today, as I said, right, our flagship product is I mean, we have a 1-ton trolley mover. So that's kind of the flagship. We are deployed across factories in US, India, and Southeast Asia, right now. Yeah, we have an office in Rochester Hills in Detroit, from where we service our US customers. And we are now seeing early signs of a few customers going kind of global with us, like the same customer. We are doing like a demo in their Mexican plant, their US operation, in India, in Vietnam, right? So manufacturing by nature is very global. And a lot of people ask me, right? I mean, yeah, okay, which countries are you going to be? I mean, we can't do that, right? Because a Bosch or a Schneider or say a Daimler will have a factory all over the world, and they would like a reliable partner who can service them in every factory around the world, right? And that's something that we have to develop the capability for. But right now we are in these three places: America, India, and Southeast Asia. So we also have a full time presence in Thailand. Thailand is like the automotive hub of Southeast Asia, and Vietnam is an upcoming hub. So these are the two places there. Then we have a small bin mover also, which can move bins. We can automatically pick a bin from a conveyor, place it on another. So these are for small parts. Then we're coming up with this new assembly line, automated assembly line product. That's something new. We're coming out with a pallet mover. Yeah, what we saw is that end of line and beginning of line, there is enough pallet stuff even in automotive, and that's something that we would like to cater, and we can then expand our verticals. A lot of demand from, say, the what in India is called FMCG or US CPG vertical, and they are highly palletized. CPG, pharma, petrochemicals. So we're making a pallet mover also for those verticals. So yeah, and some very innovative products, which are yeah, which we'll rather show than tell. Yeah, let's see.
Fantastic. I heard you say that a lot of Indian manufacturing plants have Japanese robots, or at least robots manufactured by Japanese companies. And what you're looking forward to is having Ati in a Japanese factory.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we are already in Japanese factories. Yeah, I mean, we are in Toyota, we are in Yokohama, right? So I mean, they're big names where we are already running Suzuki. But yeah, but we're already in US in the best of the names there also. Cummins or yeah, right. So we're really in big names for Via, but but yeah, but I think Japan has this association with robotics, and I'm quite keen that we should not just in Japanese factories, but our robots should run in Japan, right? Although we're not there yet in terms of just our GTM, I think we could be. We think US is a more attractive market for us, and that's where we are heading, and that's the good thing about US, by the way, right? I mean, US is a very open economy. It's easy for an innovative company to enter the US market. Japan has other barriers, cultural barriers to entry, for a company to come in, which and generally I think Indians, especially Bangalore, is very close to the US. Bangalore is closer to US than to Bombay and Delhi, right? So so we feel. I mean, I always feel US is next door, right? So that's our primary go-to market right now.
Yeah, and this is a very good time to enter the US market because there's a lot of talk about bringing manufacturing back, and
Mhm.
US as a country cannot compete with the kind of labor costs that Vietnam and China and a lot of the Southeast Asian countries have to offer. But what
Mm.
it can do is bring in world class automation, and I think this is a good time to enter.
I do think so. And imagine, right? I mean, the factory of the future would be. I don't know if dark factory is the idea, is going to be very common or not, but it's kind of the ideal in a way. If you have to create the physics point mass, the ideal factory is the dark factory. And if the factory were to be truly dark, it wouldn't matter. It You would actually be closest to the point of consumption. Actually, all the factories in the world will move. I mean, US is the largest consuming economy in the world, so I should say all, but most of the factories will move to the US. If factories were to get closer to being dark, also they don't have to be truly dark. But if closer to being a dark factory, the more you want to be in the US, because logistics, electricity, all the other things are actually way cheaper in the US compared to many of the other parts of the world, right? So why wouldn't you be in the US if you were to make the factory highly automated, right? So I do think US manufacturing has a very bright future.
That's great to know, both for Ati Motors and also for the US. Well, Saurabh, it was a pleasure talking to you. I think I could relate a lot because we are both from similar fields,
That's right.
and the interests also quite matched up. So it was a lovely conversation. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Bala. Thanks for having me.